Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. There are so many new faces to the Food and Farming Network in this room. I'm really excited to have you all here. I'm Heather Ratliff. I'm one of the co-chairs of the network. Bill Palladino, my fearless co-leader, is over there manning the camera. The way that the network is set up is that every other month we do a business meeting and then we do a study session. During our study sessions, we do a deeper dive into some of the relevant topics around the food and farming community. Often we go for a tour of a local organization and learn more about what they're doing to help the community. Today we thought that it would be a good time to talk about weather. It's nearly 60 degrees in December, and it's been an exciting year of extreme weather events and an exciting several years of extreme weather events. So we really wanted to talk about how that directly impacts the food community, how that affects the farmers, what they're doing to react to recent weather events, what they're doing to prepare for future seasons. We recently held a survey where we asked what people were looking of the network and what people wanted from us. And all of the farmers said that they wanted a space where they could provide their insights and their experiences and that they could learn from other farmers. And so we thought that this would be a really good topic to jump right into that and talk about what the farmers are doing. Allow our farmers on our panel to speak. Any farmers in the room, and well, really everybody is invited to participate in the conversation. We have Wendy Wieland here. Wendy will be moderating today's session. She is with the MSU Product Center and works to help provide guidance to small agribusiness owners, and thus is our task force leader in the agribusiness action area. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Wendy.
Thanks, Heather. Well, welcome everyone. I am Wendy Wieland, and I'm wearing, although I do work for the MSU Product Center, a little slightly different hat today, all within the university, and that is of an MSU extension staff person working on community food systems in northern Michigan. So, before we further ado, I have to have a shameless plug for opportunity for you all who are concerned in community food systems, farming, agriculture, and food to give us input at MSU Extension. And there'll be some of these orange sheets going around as we talk so that you can help sharpen our focus as a university working on these issues. Okay, back to the agenda. So the Food and Farming Network, as I was thinking about the network, and I've been involved for years in my role with Extension, is just, we are a network in every sense of that word. And I went to our website last night to just remind myself of because it is kind of, some people think we're a little amorphous, and how do we explain? What are you guys really? So we are intentionally very, very plastic, if you will, in our adaptability as we work. You might think of the network, and we have ties that bind us to each other's work, but many of those ties are not necessarily seen and readily apparent. So as you get to know the network more, go to our website, look at some of our activities, look at our goals and objectives. But I think of the network just as a roadmap to the kinds of issues surrounding food and farming in this part of the state that we all are concerned in. We are not driving the car, but we are certainly pointing out and making connections to each other to make all of our journey more productive, both financially and in every way that we care about. So that's a way to think about the network. We are mostly volunteer, although we do have a wonderful new staff person that's helping us. Carol Henley is our first official part-time staff person. I don't want to let her efforts go unrecognized because it's been very helpful to have Carol there prodding us and moving us along. So we are here today to talk about the extreme weather trends, of which of course we're experiencing even as we speak, and alternative systems that may help us perform better on our farms when conventional production is not necessarily profitable. So how is this weather, real life, real time, been affecting the farmers and what they think about doing proactively, as much as we all ever can, and I grew up on a dairy farm in Charles Lake County, to be preventative and try to anticipate some of those trends. So without any delay further, I'd like to introduce today's panel speakers. Dave Barrons, as many of you will recognize from your television screens, has been a very familiar face in the area for a number of years. He's lived in Leelanau County for 26 years with degrees from Miami of Ohio, Purdue, and North Carolina. He worked for 19 years as the meteorologist for 9 and 10 News. And before that was a street reporter for 7 and 4 for 10 years. Did not know that about Dave. He hosts, and many of you have probably heard, his show that is broadcast on Up North Media, the public access channel here locally, and it's on a show on community resiliency. Next panelist is Jim Nugent, who was with MSU Extension until his retirement and the coordinator of the Northwest Michigan Horticultural Research Station out on the peninsula. Very active statewide in cherry programming and all sorts of organizations. We could go on and on with Jim's dossier, but is certainly still actively involved in the industry with Graceland Fruit and other entities and land use groups. Josh Wunsch is a third-generation orchard owner, and he is primarily growing black sweet cherries for both the fresh market and use in commercial processing. Also has apple acreage and lots of other value-added interests. His farm is located on Old Mission Peninsula, and Josh is an advocate of again, not only the agricultural industry, but the kind of peaceful, I have here, quiet lifestyle that his grandparents sought so many years ago as a part of his farming experience. And the last panelist today will be Paul May, who raises a he and his wife Sharon have their farm in Benzie County, and they are protein producers, so they are doing custom and pilot pasturing grass-fed beef and lamb, along with some pastured poultry using the CSA model of market delivery, on 24 acres rotationally grazed. And Paul talks weather with his older brother, who is in the Navy. So we have some different scales and viewpoints, of course, around this topic, and I'm really looking forward to the lively discussion. So, Dave, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Wendy.
I'm going to move so I can be out of your way.
We're not going to move around a whole lot because I do that when I talk. Hi.
Hello.
I'm impressed. I thought when Carol invited me, I really thought we might have a group of 8 or 10. So this is exciting. I'm looking forward to a discussion. I'm going to show you essentially just this one graphic. We'll have it in motion, and I'll go through what I see as the meaning of it. And I heard Josh use this phrase just minutes ago, or someone did up near the table, maybe it was you, Wendy, weatherproofing farms. I know nothing about that. And I'm here to answer questions. I suspect, struggle with answering some of them from your own perspective. But I'm going to run through this. I think it's the best graphic portrayal of warming, what's going on. It has implications. I'll talk a little of that and get my part over with. This came from Jim Hansen. It was out in 2010. If we put it in motion, you'll see it's about how the distribution of temperature, high temperature readings in the northern hemisphere, all of the high temperature readings during the afternoon at all the reporting sites all over the northern hemisphere, all of that database is in this graphic. And again, you'll see the thing. We'll put it in motion. Let's just go through it. Watch what happens in terms of the shift, and then I'll begin explaining. You'll simply see it move to the right towards the heat. There's go back in and then freeze it again right there. So this is the normal distribution leading up to, I mean, this is a long-term norm, and I can't tell you exactly how many years, but it's a smooth, normal distribution of temperatures. One standard deviation, two standard deviations, three standard deviations above the midpoint, above the norm, and likewise below. And color-coded, it's going to be interesting, and to point this out, I mean, I had to watch this a few times before I really caught this, but you'll literally see as we shift our summer temperatures warmer and warmer, as Hansen is, by the way, are you familiar with James Hansen, the name? Former head of Goddard Research for NASA, outspoken climate predictor. He's the one who testified in the summer of '88 in front of Congress that stirred up the whole global warming debate, got going in a big way, and then it was been going before that. He presented charts where he had a high heating possibility, low heating possibility, a mid-range, and we're running right along the mid-range forecast that he made in 1988. He's a climate forecaster. But the real interesting thing about what I just showed you, and I'm going to go through it, this is not modeling of the future. This is a period from the date is what, 1951 to 2010, every high temperature, summertime highs, across every single reporting site in the entire northern hemisphere is in the database. So what we're seeing is what's really happened, not a forecast based on mathematical modeling of the future. This is what's really happened to our summer temperatures across the northern hemisphere over that period of time. Say it again. Watch the blue and the gray, or the white, simply erode. That's why I'm glad he colored it this way. It didn't really hit me until yesterday, just how graphic the erosion of the old cool, the old normal. The old normal being eroded away. And what we see here is a shift of this bell curve, smooth bell curve of long-term normal. We've seen over that period of time of 1950 to 2010, the new normal right there graphically in front of us. Back to the beginning. And freeze again. Notice we have some events here in the warm area that are 3 standard deviations above the norm. Now, I don't know a lot about statistics. Is that understandable for most of you how extreme that is, 3 standard deviations? It's obviously extreme. We have very few incidents of that in the long-term normal, whatever the percentage of incident. It's right down here. Truly just a handful. We also have few 2 standard deviation events, more than the 3. We've got lots of normal extreme weather in here, normal extreme weather, up to a standard deviation above the real center point, or the norm, or the motion. And part of the meaning of this really is not just that we're getting more real extremes, but look how many more 2 standard deviation events are going on, which used to be really extreme. They're now shifting into the new norm. Here's the new, it's not a bell curve because it's not smooth, but we can smooth it somewhere like that. So we're increasing the frequency of old extremes, even increasing the frequency of real extreme in the old record, and even having some events that are up 5 standard deviations above the old norm. I think it's a real graphic display of the shift that's going on. Now, let's go back to the beginning one more time. So, frequency, chances of any one location having a 3 standard deviation event, heating event in this distribution was 1 in 1,000. That's part of how you determine what the 3rd standard deviation is. But it's 1 chance in 1,000, 1 year in 1,000, any one location will get a heating event that was 3 standard deviations above the normal. When we go on, we've increased it, frankly, 10 times. So now, for any one location, it's 10 times that. It's 10 years out of 1,000 that you might get a 3 standard deviation event in the current regime that appears to be setting up. Again, this is 1950 to 2010. This is what's actually happened. So those odds have gone up 10 times. Now 10 years in 1,000 for any place having that kind of event doesn't seem like a great, 10 years in 1,000 is not a huge number. But of course, heat doesn't happen just at one location, and it's over a wider spread area. And we have a whole area of new heating that used to be extreme, that will be in the new norm, much closer to the norm. Last few thoughts here before I answer a few questions and then turn it over and we can get into broader questions perhaps. But just a couple of statistics. I just learned these in the last 2 days to suggest this is all still going on, and I think we know it is. And I don't have this in my head, how many of the last 5 years since this report came out have been among the 5 warmest on the record, but this year is going to be the warmest on record. Through the end of September, the Arctic, above the Arctic Circle, average daytime temperature, that's the average of daytime, or average daily temperature, that's the average of the nighttime high, daytime high and nighttime low for a single day average. That's gone up 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit just this year, 1.3 degrees Celsius. Yesterday I saw this. I saw it published, they're broadcast in 2 places, and the numbers were a little different, but the orders of magnitude are correct. In December alone, this country has set 1,500 to 1,700 new high temperature records, 1,100 overnight high low temperature records, and total number of cool temperature records in just this month in the United States have been 7. And that's not another kind of demonstration of this shift. I know that, and I'm pretty sure this is still factually true. It was up to about 4 years ago. The long-term trend from the 1930s for our area right here shows the most dramatic shift in our the low temperature overnight, the increase in the overnight low temperatures. That was forecast in some of the earliest global warming, climate change forecasts, computer forecasts even. Early on, that we'd see a greater shift across the far northern latitudes where we have, and in our overnight temperatures would be the most significant statistical move versus the daytime high. This is a measure of daytime highs. That's a huge statistical shift. To see that kind of increase in even the extremes. That's all I have right now. And I don't know how to translate that into weatherproofing farms. That's fascinating to me, but I don't have the answers to that. Questions about weather and some other trends, I'm sure I've left some things out, so feel free to just pipe up and ask.
Dave, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just based on your meteorological, it's a hard word, background, how much of this year in particular in the records might be due to El Nino versus long-term climate shifts and increasing temperature? Or are those related, or?
Oh, they're very much related.
Okay.
One thing I forgot to bring was my globe. To answer your question, I like to work with a globe. Weather is all about moving heat. All of weather is simply about having this planet that's differentially heated. We're always cool at the Arctic and the Antarctic and warm in the tropics. That's differential heating in a fluid, actually 2 fluids, water and air. But you can't have differential heating in a free-flowing fluid. It's early laws of physics. The one's cold, cold air's cold, it's heavy, it's dense. Gravity pulls it down, pushes the other air away. I've learned every second grader that I've ever spoken to knows that warm air rises. But the truth is, warm air doesn't do anything by itself. Cold air gets pulled down because it's heavy. Gravity is the engine that drives it. Gravity and the sun drive the weather at the basic level.
Other differential equations behind what you're discussing?
I don't know differential equation.
Back that up.
Oh, yeah, to be sure. First of all, I'm not a trained meteorologist. I've never taken a weather class in my life. I'm a social scientist. I don't know anything about differential.
I'm a sociology degree.
There's a lot of math behind all of this. That's why I never did it.
I think this is great. Here we've got a guy that we all watch TV. And he's a guy I'd listen to, and he just told us he's not a meteorologist. But I still love him.
Anything I share comes from my own study. I'm a social scientist, yeah. Weather was a hobby. All of these trends, I'm a historian too. I mean, I like all that stuff. But putting it together, the realities of the world we live in, and it seems to me it's part of my resilience work. Why even talk about resilience? Well, because the climate is changing. The engine is already going. Here's another message of this shift. Momentum's huge in meteorology, weather, and climatology, weather over time. Momentum buildup is enormous. Think about this. This is the simplest example of it. The shortest day of the year is next week. On average, the coldest weeks are another 3 weeks later. The longest day of the year is June 21st. On average, the warmest days are late July into August. There's the buildup of momentum before the impact hits. We got the train running already. This demonstrates it. And my point of that. Climate change is already underway. Resource constraint. We're moving into a whole new experience of human history. We've had gobs of resource in the skin of the earth that we've mined. Resource picked up, used. But nobody's making any more of it. And we're really getting to a point that with 7 billion of us, the lines of supply are thin in lots of ways. But climate and resource constraint have been a focus of what I've been doing for the last 6 years. And that's why I'm a reporter who studied climate and like sharing it. One more.
We'll take one more quick and then we're going to get to our panel. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. Quick question. Do you know, so this is the Northern Hemisphere, right?
Yes.
This is Hanson's. Do you know of any stats or studies that show temperature anomalies specific to the Northern Midwest or Great Lakes region? Are they out there?
I'm sure they are. Each forecast office has a climatologist responsible for collating data and getting in central databases. I don't know it, but it's there.
I think if you looked at the National Climate Assessment, which is broken into regions, there's data for the Midwest.
All right, to keep us on time, I'd like to include now the rest of our panel, and I'm going to turn it first over to Jim Nugent to share thoughts and observations. We're going to spend about 5 minutes, if we can kind of hold to that per the speaker, and then we will have a lively interactive discussion. So,
Good, thanks. Well, I've got a small farm. We raise a little over 40 acres of cherries, but I spent a career with MSU Extension and at the research station, and that old scientist is just sort of in me. So when we were talking about climate variability, I thought it would be interesting to share one piece of information. When I first came to Leelanau County as the county extension director back in '76, one of the longtime growers up in East Leland said, well, he said, you can pretty well peg set your calendar by bloom on tart cherries in East Leland because it's going to be about May 21st. Well, I know that it wasn't just exactly May 21st, and he did too, but it was quite consistent around that. where our research station is located in Bingham Township, we on average would probably bloom about 3 days ahead of East Leland. So that would have said at that site historically, one would have expected the bloom date to be about May 18th. But since the research station we started in the late 70s with planted trees, so by the time they could get bloom dates, this writing is really small, so I'm going to just point out what they did. I had Bill Klein at the research station just go back and do something for me. This is the bloom dates at the research station since 1983 up through 2015. And I thought when we were talking about variability, that you might find this a little bit interesting. We have seen variability. There's been variability historically, but I think the variability in bloom date is getting greater, and that isn't driven by those summer temperatures Dave showed, but it's really driven by the shoulder season in spring, how that warm-up occurs, and the effect that it has. And I'll point out, down here at the bottom is, let's see, that's May 27. And up here at the top is April, that's 18th, 21st, above the April 19th or 20th. And that, not surprisingly, was 2012. But in 2002, we also had a disastrous crop failure. And our bloom didn't end up really early that year, but we did have some record heat in April that advanced the buds into a susceptible stage. We had then a fairly normal Alberta clipper that came down with some wind and really wiped us out. We ended up, by the time we got the bloom, it wasn't so early. But in 2012, we came back with another major freeze event. In 2002, Northwest Michigan produced 0.6% of an average of the 5-year average before that. 0.6%. We harvested 1 million pounds that year. I think we probably had 2 million on the trees, but about 1 million was spread out on 96% of the acreage, and the other 1 million was on 4 or 5% that got harvested. So what I want to point out is that we still see this variability, but in 2012, we had such an extreme event that while this is tart cherry harvest, or bloom, sweet cherry bloom actually occurred in March. And on March 26th of 2012, I calculated the growing degree days, the method we used to kind of simulate what the tree is seeing in terms of heat, using base 42, which is our best simulator of tree growth. And we were actually at the same heat level on March 26th as the previous 5-year average had been for May 6th. And, or maybe it was May 4th, but right in there, it was 5.5 weeks ahead of normal. And I remember calling our agricultural meteorologist at MSU, Jeff Andreessen, and telling him that. And he said, yeah, he just was giving a talk in Southwest Michigan and used Traverse City data. 5.5 weeks is mind-boggling early. And now it turned kind of normal in April. So we kind of, typically between sweet bloom and tart bloom, there's about a 5-day spread, just sort of on average. There's different varieties of sweets that bloom at different times. But of the kind of the earlier major varieties, we have usually on average about 6 days earlier bloom on sweets. So, but this year that actually was back up in March on some of the earlier varieties. So the other thing that I would point out here is April 30th. And when I was looking at how far 12 was ahead of the previous 5-year average, it included the bloom date in 2010, which occurred in April on tart cherries. And I believe that was the first time that we had bloomed in April in my lifetime. And I say my lifetime because there's always been variability. And so it's not like variability is completely new. Our second earliest year in terms of degree day accumulation was actually 1945. And when I talked to Jeff back in 12, I said, if you look back to 45 data to see how they compare, and he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, he had. We were running ahead of 45. I wasn't born yet in 45, but I heard from the old timers always, oh, but it's not as bad as 45. 45 we thought was a once in a 100-year event. It was another year when the cherry crop was basically wiped out in northern Michigan, our cherry crop. We came back in 2002 with even a lower crop than we had in 45. But 45, 02, and 12 are our smallest crops we've ever produced. So I just thought when we were talking about variability, I would put this in because it's such a driver for our perennial crops. Annual crops have a different, it's very different because those are planted every year. But in perennial crops, we have to get the trees through the winters, and then we have to bring them out of dormancy. We have to get them into dormancy, get them to survive the winter, and then bring them out of dormancy as we go into the spring. So I just thought that might help kind of set a stage.
Thank you very much, Jim. Very interesting data. Josh, would you like to?
Okay, I will take a swing at the assignment, which was weatherproofing farms. At least that was the assignment that I understood from communications. I, like Jim, am very much attached to large numbers of fruit trees. And with a particular emphasis, as Wendy indicated in her introduction, to dark sweet cherries, which are among the most sensitive of tree fruit crops and the ones that are quite often most susceptible to goofy weather. When we're addressing the issues of weatherproofing orchards, 2 trips through the polar vortex, and we're all about bracing ourselves for cold temperature extremes. And there are probably out on our place somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.5 acres of what used to be magnificent Heidelfingen trees that are now lounging in brush piles, awaiting incineration as a result of the extremely cold temperatures. Other varieties survived remarkably well compared to their neighbors, and yet there were subtle effects on the quality of the fruit. The other concern are heavy rain events. Typically, one of the reasons why we can do a very successful job of sweet cherries, particularly on Old Mission, is because in the months of July and early August we go Kalahari dry. That sweet cherries are very sensitive to rain cracking. If there's an absence of rain, we win. If there are unexpected rains, we have a little problem. Intense heat is something that we've certainly seen not only in recent years, but in prior years. If it's the wrong time, in the wrong stage of the development of the fruit, high temperatures and scorching sunshine can be a terrific problem, particularly if you're close to harvest. Changes in the weather get into the subtleties of insect and disease management. We use predictive models as far as trying to peg when insects and diseases are going to be an issue. Diseases are typically the convergence of temperature and moisture. And we have to be prepared to react very quickly to those circumstances. In preparing for this conversation, I realized that climate change in agriculture is and always has been a daily occurrence. And perhaps to the extent that those of us in the basic food production sector tend to be more focused on the immediate challenges of how the climate has changed from the time we went to sleep to the time we wake up, and less inclined to be responsive to long-term trends, no matter how well founded and researched the supporting science may be. We're rats in a maze. We evolve cropping systems that are adaptive. We don't try to grow bananas in northern Michigan. We do more of what works and less of what doesn't. The tart cherry graph that Jim displayed is an illustration of some very unusual events. Tart cherries during my lifetime have been thought to be the most rock-solid, predictable, dependable tree fruit crop that we can raise in this area. The 2002 and 2012 episodes were borderline unimaginable as far as how fast we went from tens of millions of pounds to practically nothing in the space of a few short months. A lot of tail on that dog too, as far as the disruptions in marketing, and let's not forget that agriculture, wherever you go, is a phenomena that usually derives very tight to often negative margins. So it's inevitably a dollar-driven process from the standpoint of preparation and decision-making. In order to have a tree survive an extremely cold winter, it's important to kind of coast to a nice dormant stage. So de-invigorating the trees, not stimulating a tremendous amount of metabolic activity late in the growing season is incredibly important. Trees that are excited going into a cold weather event are more apt to just get nailed. There will not just be a few buds lost here and there. Tissue death will occur. So the tree has to be asleep, sound asleep. It has to be nutritionally fortified in order to survive really low temperatures. Rainfall in the August 2nd event, which was the one that is the most recent in memory for us, and it completely destroyed our apple crop. On August 1st, we were really pretty impressed with what was coming. On August 3rd, we were looking at 100 acres of garbage hanging on trees. That quit. But in association with the 70 to 90 mile an hour winds, the nickel-sized hail, we also got 2.5 inches of rain in 20 minutes. And that kind of loosened the ground, and that turned offset trails into creeks, rivers. So there was a tremendous amount of soil displacement. Number one pollutant in aggregate agriculture, this is boring stuff, guys, I warn you, is sediment, displaced soil. In preparation for this conversation, one of the things that I discovered was that globally, soil erosion, misplaced soil, the mismanagement of a soil, accounts for contributes to 20% of the net influence on what we now consider climate change. If we, and that's low-hanging fruit, you know, from the standpoint of being able to exercise corrective measures. We have a body of experience, science, technology that could have an enormous impact globally if it were distributed. 20% is a big piece of the problem. If we could deal with half of that, it would have enormous significance, and it could happen very quickly. But we've not got a public effort going forward to continue to support that. And I'll just I'll accelerate, Wendy.
Yes,
I'll
we're
wrap it
going to
up.
give Paul his due.
Yeah. I guess the other way to weatherproof a farm is with crop insurance, and that's a big bet.
Can the average Sam, Joe, or Molly learn how to graft
Can you hold that question
Sure.
until we conclude with our last panelist? And
Makes sense to do this now.
you know, I was thinking, Carol, that it's as if we had set this up with Josh, and believe me, we hadn't. We have a nice little demonstration to talk about some of the principles, and Pepper Bromelmeier has come from Natural Resource Conservation Service to show us a little model, and then we will take Paul. So not to.
Hi, so I've been a student of soil health since before it was cool. And
It's cool now, Pepper?
it's definitely cool now.
Okay.
And oh my gosh, with the, everybody who's spoken so far so ties into that. I even recently applied for a job in Madison, Wisconsin to become a national soil health specialist so that I could spread this out beyond just our wonderful region here. However, I get to stay here with all of you fine folks and still be here. So I thought, I'm going to start hammering it home here as well. So I recently took a trip out west, and as I was on that plane, I'm flying over the middle of the country, and there were bare fields, erosion, it was nasty. And if we all have decent soil and healthy soils, they're going to infiltrate better. They're going to hold water during those droughts. We're not going to have the flooding issues that we have. And so, you might want to be a volunteer. You might want to water pour on this.
I like you, you're in the
You want to be
dirt.
another one? All right. So, on this side right here, we have, this is soil from downstate. My state agronomist, this is across the road from his place. Conventionally tilled, monoculture, same crop every year, soil. This is from his farm right across the road. It has been under no-till for 32 years, diversity in cropping and all that kind of stuff. So basically, what we've got here are little doohickeys with little holes in them. Doohickeys. Tupperware. Thank you. That's the word. Technical terms. You gotta keep it easy. So what we're going to test here is how well do these two soils infiltrate. All right. So you ready?
How aggressively are we going to pour?
We're going to pour till it fills this thing, and then it's just going to, it'll be.
You want it all in there?
Yep.
All right.
Now this one is running because it has holes in the side of the jar, but that'll probably change here shortly.
Oh, you spiked the experiment.
Good. All right. So envision the fact that we have two fields side by side with the soil here has been not tilled, which means you got mycorrhizal fungi in there, and they're all secreting these glues that hold the soil together, but it also allows for infiltration and not having as much runoff. So, like I said, I used this a while ago, so I should have probably done this before I got here, but there were probably cracks in the side of the jar that allowed that. Last time I did this with a bunch of kids, this thing was like up to there, and it was there still when we were done. So there's one, and the next one, Paul, if I can have you again.
Yes.
Same soil type here. Yes. So this is our, what do they call this? Slate test. So, same soils, again, and these have been air dried, so that means that there's no air in them. So when it hits the water, it's all the water's gonna go rushing inside the soil particles here, or clods. And, again, this one's been tilled a lot, this one has not. So we're gonna put it in there, and we're just gonna place it gently in there and let it do its thing.
Should I anecdotally share with the crowd what's happening up here in case you
Sure.
can't see it?
Yeah, yeah.
Much of the soil has washed underneath this one. Over here, there's virtually nothing. You may have already said that while I was paying attention.
I did not. So check out this guy, I should probably put some paper behind it so you guys can see what's going on. Does that make it better?
Yeah.
Okay, so as the water rushes into here, there's no glue in there. There's no microorganisms, there's no anything that has gotten out there and grabbed that and held onto it. I even did this test with pasture situation and a potato field right across the street from in Talcasco, which that's like sands. I'm thinking, I don't know that sands are gonna even work for this. But the pasture soil sat just like this one. See, nothing's happening here. It's not breaking apart, all that. This one, if we were to let this sit and watch it by the end of the discussion, it'll be almost completely destroyed. So that means that it's not gonna withstand any erosion. It's not gonna, it's not gonna hold any nutrients. There goes another clod. So there's my two things to kind of bring into our discussion.
Okay, now just quickly relate the importance of the different rates of infiltration with crop performance and carbon sequestration.
Good idea, thank you. All right, so here's our description, or our erosion. This happened behind my house. It wasn't even August 2nd. It was a couple years ago when we had a 1-inch rain, and the guy had plowed up and down the hills to put the corn in, flooded my house. I had sediment in my house all the way in through 2 rooms and the whole bit because there was a wall of water that came down that hill into my house. Nowhere else where it was covered did we have this issue. So if you have soils that can't infiltrate, or that they've been damaged and it doesn't have anything there that can let that water infiltrate, we're going to have runoff problems, we're going to have flooding, we're going to have, there goes all the carbon as well. So as the soil erodes, not only do you pollute our waterways, but that ability for that soil to hold that carbon, which we can, start to reduce the amount of carbon that's in our atmosphere if we can all store it in the soils. So the healthier soils, the more carbon it absorbs and becomes a part of that whole engine that drives production in for nutrient cycling and the whole bit. So it has an ability for us to be able to manage even on a global scale. If everybody had healthy soils, it would dramatically reduce the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere and going into the soils instead.
Thanks, I really appreciate that demonstration. And so I could Paul May is gonna conclude our panelist remarks, and then we will open it up. If you do have questions that you want to write down, and that's an easier way, I'm glad to read them to the panel. We're a fairly small group, but we do want to make sure we have time for that. So Paul.
Thanks. I think in Congress, the way to do this would be for a member to secede his, or cede his minutes to the others. I feel a little bit out of my depth here with some of you guys, but what Pepper had to say really relates to what we do. I'm not a fruit grower. I'm raising livestock on pasture. We don't till anything. So how to think about contributing to a discussion about resilient or weatherproofing ourselves from extremes. I was scratching my head trying to think about, well, how do I relate to that? And I'm out in the weather just like these guys are. I would suspect many of you are too. And the change that's going on is, of course, always on my mind. I know that there's at least one other grazer here, Vic, who is thinking about these things like I do. We're trying to rely upon planted or harvested feeds less and less. That's what advances what we're doing. So how are we not already weatherproofed? How are we not already resilient? Well, this last spring, when the fruit trees were getting a little bit retarded on degree days to come forward, I too was suffering a little bit of my pasture in that my legumes were getting frosted. So you know, the grasses, which do fine in the spring, they were starting to move along. But my legume output for the first half of the summer was really getting knocked backwards. So it is an issue for me and Vic and other grazers is how do we deal with these extremes where the shoulder seasons are getting beat up? Maybe many years we'll have a season extension into the winter as we are this year. And we've seen this a couple of times before with these mild Decembers. But we did have these two winters before this that were beating up Josh's cherry trees pretty rough with those cold temperatures. And when we have variability, it's really hard on anything besides forage, certainly. So strategies for weatherproofing food production is a major challenge. I will tell you that my own goal, and I do raise some animals that have one stomach, they're mostly raising ruminants, beef and sheep, but pigs and chickens, we're very much reliant on corn and soybeans for feed that comes in the bag. And I am now beginning to obsess over how to grow things so that I don't have to buy corn and soy, which I have my own feelings about. They're susceptible to weather. That's where I'm susceptible to weather, is where I'm raising animals with one stomach. I talked to some folks at one of these events a couple of months ago who have a nice organic farm up by Petoskey. I can't remember the name of their farm, but they're very productive. And the guy laughed at the idea. I asked him, how many acres do you have under tillage that you're producing stuff on? He says, we don't grow anything outside. We grow everything under cover. And they had a half an acre or something planted outside that was just kind of a throwaway thing. They didn't count on it for anything. But anything that they're producing their income on, it's under a hoop so that they can control it. And I think that's very forward thinking. I don't think we're going to put these cherry orchards under a hoop. But, right, you know, these are thorny issues, and I think Pepper's subject is exactly the one that I'd love to stray into, but I think that we came here to talk about making ourselves weather-proof in the face of these extremes. So.
Thank you, panelists. Very informative and certainly thought-provoking. So I do want to open it up to questions from you all, and like every good MSU extension facilitator or convener, I've got a few shared expectations to just remind us all of as we get into this part of the program. So be attentive, obviously, and respectful, because we know this topic, maybe more than some as of late, although that might not be true either, can be controversial. And so please do actively listen, respect, you know, convergent thoughts and opinions that may be different than yours. We aren't going to solve anything here today. This is just really meant to do what the network does at its best, is to connect us and leave us all probably wanting to know more about the subject as we walk out the door at just about 25 minutes. Please, if you could, I'll recognize you, because I'm not seeing any specific questions that came in on cards, but you can still write those down if that's your preferred way. And there's one right now. And we will, I'll recognize people and give everybody a chance to talk before coming back to you if you've already spoken. So that way we can just make sure everybody has a chance to jump in on the conversation. So the first question is, where in Michigan can the average Sam, Joe, or Molly go to learn about grafting techniques? Okay. This is maybe a little off topic. Was this your question? Right. Okay. Seminars, that would behoove people to attend for this agricultural activity? Does anybody want to jump into?
Well, these fruit growers may have a better answer, but if they don't have a better answer, talk to Amanda Kick, because she has, with Island, helped people get in the room with people who are good at grafting and give lessons, if you will. But
Okay, the quickest way is to go to the archival information at the MSU Extension Bulletin Office, which is now, I believe, exclusively online. There's a very good how to do it basics on grafting. It's primarily aimed at apples, which are easy because you're going wood to wood, cambium to cambium. Stone fruits are a little trickier because it's a bud graft. You have to have an identified compatible rootstock that goes with the scion wood. You have to make absolutely sure that once you figure out how to make the cut and make the graft union, you seal it up tight with grafting compounds so that that cambium has a chance to knit together. Don't discard the internet as a useful source of information as far as grafting techniques.
Thank you. All right, the next question is Grand Traverse County just passed a soil erosion ordinance. One negative was changing the grading from 10% to 20%. Does anybody want to comment or add to the discussion?
The grading as far as the pitch of slopes?
I'm assuming that's what was meant, yes.
I don't probably have anything very insightful there, except to say, I think if you don't work with soils a lot or topography, you'd be really, really surprised at how steep a 20% grade is. That's really, really steep. 10% is a significantly steep hill. But I don't want to get into that. I would comment though, I was thinking about it, as we look at changes in agriculture over time. When I was a kid, we didn't have herbicides, so we controlled the weeds in orchards by king cultivation. And we would plant a cover crop in fall to help retain the soil for fall and spring, usually typically rye. Some people just let the weeds grow. But then we'd till it during the summer. And I can remember every time we would get a really hard rain, my dad had a bucket that went on the back of the tractor, and we'd go down and we'd try to scoop up as much of the runoff that went down in the valleys as we could and bring it back up to fill in the gullies in the orchard. It was not a terribly sustainable system because we were growing our orchards on this. And it just, sometimes we look the past, but when herbicides came along, we came up with a completely different system where we actually controlled the weeds under the trees. Before, we used to have this square of quadgrass right around the base of every tree. We controlled the weeds under the tree, and that allowed us to grow sod in the middle. So we now actually have systems that are no-till. We're not rotating crops, but we basically no-till for 30 years or something, and then we till it for a couple of years as we replant. But it's just an example of a much more sustainable system, and it's also, to me, it's always been a good example of the complexity of the system. Because I spent a lot of my career working in integrated pest management and trying to figure out ways to reduce pesticide use, and yet that was an example where to go completely away from pesticides, we could go back to an old system that was very unsustainable. We got to get much smarter as we go to the future, but I just thought of that as a good example.
Pepper's going to give us a 10-second infomercial on soil lenses.
On soil lenses.
Yes.
Is that what you were raising your hand for, Pepper, or
Well,
did you have
it's
this?
kind of similar along the lines of what he was referring to about with the herbicide versus not. Your soil health underneath trees that have had that herbicide strip though is going to be a lot less because there's not carbon being put back into the soil every year. Michael Phillips was at the Small Farms Intensive Study last year. I work with a lot of people on putting mulch down and all that kind of stuff that would retain moisture and add carbon and that kind of stuff. So there are some things that you can do that would be weatherproofing your land by one of the ways would be to mulch. Now, it's hard to do on a large scale, right? I mean, you have to have a pretty good, do you buy herbicides or do you hire somebody to put your mulch around? I mean, you can potentially do something along those lines. And then also he mentioned things that are different rooting depths of plants that can be actually grown right under the trees that don't take away the nutrients and all that. They all kind of work symbiotically together, so comfrey and some other deep-rooted plants versus sod, because sod's not good around the trees, but, so there are other things to explore.
So
For,
let me comment on that. We actually did research trying to grow things, seed them under the trees and grow them, and we actually had some pretty rough luck doing it because it's really hard to get them seeded. But there is a couple of things that I think, talking about adaptive. In my orchards, I've gone to legumes instead of, mixture of grass and legumes in the row middles. And then I've got a mower that is modified to side deliver the clippings. So I actually am trying to grow mulch. It is very expensive to haul in mulch, which is better, and has a place, but at least I'm side delivering that mulch. The other thing I make sure and do is I let the weeds grow up in fall under the orchards. That kind of looks pretty crappy. And then in spring, I wait, and it's quite critical to have weed control during last part of May, especially June and July, for non-compete with crops. But we've found data to show that competition in the fall is not significant barrier to the tree production on cherry, but we can very significantly reduce nitrate leaching if we have plants growing on that soil in fall. So it's a very complex system, but there are things that we can do.
And remember the part about de-invigorating the tree. If you can recycle some of the nutrient load in the form of the late season weed growth, then it's going to slow the tree down, and it's going to stabilize that treated strip.
Okay, Mark, no? Okay.
Yeah, I was surprised that I didn't hear any discussion around changing the varieties of cherries, or perhaps the variety of grass or legumes that you use for your pasture grasses, with regards to their resiliency or their capacity to survive extremes in weather, whether it's heat or cold. I'm curious if that's because there aren't necessarily other varieties, whether we're talking about fruit or grass or legumes, that are resilient in the face of such weather extremes, or perhaps we just haven't gotten a chance to talk about it.
Great question, Sam. In cherries, actually, we've had a breeder at MSU working on developing new tart cherry varieties. It's the only breeding program in North America. And one of the things that she was interested in was trying to develop varieties that, the variety we grow mainly in sour cherries is Montmorency. And it gets really susceptible to frost before we ever get to bloom. Almost all of our crop failures has occurred pre-bloom. When the buds are swelling, they get to that variety particularly gets to a very susceptible stage. In 2002, for example, virtually every other variety at a research station had better bud survival in the freeze event in April that took out the 2002 crop than Montmorency. Now it turned out the weather got cold, the pollination was so bad that there wasn't a lot more crop. But of that 1 million pounds we harvested that year, a lot of it was Balaton, which is a European variety. So varieties are really critical, but in tree fruits, it's really a slow process. I mean, we do try to select varieties that match our climate the best. But when you're planting a crop that generally is going to be in the ground for about 30 years, as any one grower, you've got about one chance over the lifetime of your orchard as you're planting to make those changes. We're trying to do that, but at the same time, select the varieties that the marketplace wants. And that's been one of the challenges in cherries, is finding a variety that the marketplace wants as much as Montmorency and will yield as well, while having less problems. So it is a really critical one, and I know there's an awful lot of research going on. We'll see it certainly in annual crops, as the summers get warmer, we're gonna be shifting, throughout the corn belt, those varieties are going to shift at any given location over time. It is already, it's a little more difficult than the perennial crops.
I'll respond
Okay, and then we'll take Mark.
about forage stuff. I think that my best response that I can come up with so far to extremes of weather and changes of the season and the significant effect on the shoulder seasons, and this will contribute to my strategy for the middle of summer as well, is to interseed, and I'll focus on annuals, and I'll focus on late summer / fall planting of things that will take advantage of a mild, what we used to call winter, December, looking at the first of the year, plants that will specifically, I'm certain of it, succeed for forage growth now. And then some of the, and that would be brassicas really. And also grasses like rye that will come up, or even think about things such as wheat that come up in the fall and will sit over the winter and be there for the springtime. So that I've got not just forage that I can use, but I've created root growth in the soil. And if I choose annual varieties, when those die off, I've contributed to Pepper's soil. She'll like me more.
That's very important.
I've pulled carbon out of the atmosphere and created more life down there while I'm giving myself the advantage of some feed.
Okay, Mark.
I had one comment on your question about the grafting. At the Fruit and Vegetable Show last week, there was an excellent series on vegetable grafting, and I don't know who put that on, Wendy May, so check it there.
Yeah, we can.
I didn't get to see it, but I heard about it, and it was just awesome on tomato grafting and some other things. But Jim, on the other side too, with the cherry orchards and the new high-density growing programming, it also allows a lot more control in the soil conditioning for the high-density plantings of your tree fruits, because there's high densities now in all the different types of tree fruits, which adds the space that's controlled underneath the tree to do the mulching a lot more aggressively and cost effectively to that program. I think that's going to be a huge help in the soil condition of growing products in high density situations.
Yeah, the point is, and he's right on target, if you look at apple planting today, when Josh is planting apples, when I was a kid, his dad would have probably planted 60, 75 trees to the acre. Earlier in Josh's career, he might have planted 200 trees to the acre. Today, they're planting about 1,000.
1,210.
Or 1,200. So, that's just pretty typical, and we're looking in research to try to move the tart cherry industry that way as well. We've got some dwarfing rootstocks coming along for tart and sweet cherries that I think is going to make that much more feasible. And that's what apples has really led because of their development of dwarfing rootstocks much earlier. But I will say, again, I guess when in my intro, I never really got on to what I was doing at my farm. I got off on that variability of bloom dates. But one of the things I've done in recent years is to put in irrigation. And I had always gotten by without irrigation. I used mulch, young trees. We called it poor man's irrigation. But it's a good way to help conserve moisture and grow young trees. But with the generally warmer conditions during summer, the models are not clear on whether we get more rain or not. But with more heat, if you don't get rain, the droughts get more significant. And again, we've had droughts in the past. 88 was a very bad drought. But 2001, we probably had the greatest loss of trees from drought and of any year I've seen, and then more recently one. But I've put in irrigation, and it's going to be absolutely critical if we're going to grow the dwarfing tart sweets, anything, because those rootstocks just don't have the depth of rooting. So it's going to be much more critical. But it's an adaptive strategy that we can use that water to help warm the conditions in the orchard as well if we have enough water. I don't really have enough water to do that. But another thing you'll see in the area, and I haven't done it myself, but you'll see a lot more wind machines going in, and that gets right back to Dave's point earlier about cold air settling down. And most of our frost events, which is the main driver for the size of the cherry crop, is frost. Pollination is number 2, but about 70% of the variability in cherry production, tart cherry production, is a result of frost. And a wind machine can help if on most types of frost where there's an inversion, where that cold air settles down and the warm air displaces the warm air, it rises up. So that's why we don't plant in the valleys, that's why we plant on the hills. That's why it's critical to control erosion on those hills, but but even on the hills, we can, if we can help mix that air, move that, pull that warmer air now aloft, down, it's useful. So, but I haven't gone to that yet myself, but I see a lot of other farmers that have.
Dave's been wanting to get a comment in, and then Bill. So Dave.
Well, 2 messages that I didn't say, that I didn't point out with the graph. The variability that Jim's graph showed will simply be the new norm for us going into the future. The other part of the meaning of the graph is that we're building up this heat loading, again, in a differentially heated planet, so that the heat's not uniform. And active weather, freakish weather, big storms, even the cold of the outbreak of the shift of the polar vortex the last 2 years, due to this increased heating load that's coming off the Pacific, changing the jet stream, locking that polar vortex farther south. That kind of variability is simply going to happen. I mean, I think the 3 biggest things that are going to happen to us from loading the atmosphere with carbon are acidification of the ocean, rising ocean levels, and erratic weather. Really freakish, erratic weather events will become much more the norm. Certainly that was part of the meaning of the graph. Final thought, I've heard about the importance of course, of rain, too much rain, the timing. Just before the last 2 severe winter years, there was a trend showing up that our rain pattern, the pattern of getting rain, yearly average wasn't shifting, but the pattern was. More of it spring, more of it late fall.
Into, well, how many train car loads of soybeans do we need if 20% of us choose chicken for dinner tonight? And you begin to get some idea of the immensity of scale and the dependence on a food supply. Yet the greatest problem that's inflicted on agriculture from the standpoint of making net margins is oversupply. Boy, isn't that a curious one. So we go into global modeling. We look at where we're going with population. 3.8 billion population was what was recited earlier. There's a prediction that another 1.2 billion will join us before 2050. The global models also show great challenges as far as our capacity to produce food to feed what we have now, let alone entertaining another 1.2 billion visitors. So, yeah, there are opportunities, but, you know, it's kind of like there are opportunities at a funeral home if there are enough plane crashes.
We're going to quote you on that one, Josh.
Maybe I'll say that differently.
Please!
But I think Bill asked the wrong question. And, you know, how I would ask the question is, what would Wendell do? What would Wendell Berry do? Where's your economic opportunity? Well, we're surrounded by them. There's no lack of them. The population is what it is. They want to be served. So those of us who decided to get up in the morning and do something about that, I think you just need to observe your land in between your fences and treat it well. And if you do that, whatever it is that you decide that you're going to grow and sell to your neighbor, just get a price for it that supports you. So I don't think that we need to seek out the opportunity. It's knocking us over.
just,
One more comment?
yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, in working with growers, I've seen a lot more thought given to diversification on the farm, particularly on our fruit farms, which I think is, overall seems to be a healthy thing, right? Rather than reliant on, for example, just tart cherries. And I guess my question is, do you see that as a trend, Jim or Josh? Is that, do you see that as an opportunity for growers who already have infrastructure to add other elements to their farm that might be spread out the risk, if you will?
That's a great question. Both those questions were really good questions. Over the course of my career, we have seen a lot more specialization. It's gone the opposite direction. When I started in extension, there were several dairy farms, a lot of fruit growers were raising beef on the side. There was actually more diversification. We actually had more production of some fruit crops that have vanished, pears and plums and peaches and so on. I won't say vanished, but are not nearly as common. But I think in the future, it makes very good sense to diversify, to take advantage of the investment. One of the reasons for the concentration is that when we went from hand picking our cherries to having to mechanically harvest them, it's much more efficient. We were able to compete globally. We'd have never done it if we'd had to stay with hand labor. And yet now you've got to buy this machine that today runs $200,000. So we've got to look for diversification opportunities, and you can do that both in what you grow and how you market. And I think we're going to see, we'll see increased diversification, and I think if we look at opportunities for the future, I think there's going to be opportunities for diversification in crops that there'll be some good opportunities. It just happens. I mean, if I was growing grapes, we're going to be able to produce better red wine than we used to, for example. It happens that of all of the fruit crops that I've looked at in Michigan, tart cherries are probably the most vulnerable to the changes that we're seeing. And that's a tough one because that represents 50% of the fruit acreage in northern Michigan. I mean, throwing in all the wine grapes and apples and everything else, tart cherries. And sweet cherries, which is our number 2 crop, apples number 3 and grapes number 4. Tart cherries have been such a driver. So, I mean, that is a challenge, and I don't want to bury my head in the sand, but I'm also planting some tart cherries next spring. I'm not saying that this is an impossibility, but we've got to make smarter use of things like crop insurance that we won't get into. We got to be very cognizant of what we're doing to try to minimize the risk. I'm not writing it off, but we are growing a crop that just happens to be particularly vulnerable. And of any crop grown in Michigan, honestly, I can't think of any that's probably more vulnerable than unrinsing sour cherry.
Thanks. We have come to the end of our allotted time, and I'm sure, as I mentioned, this has provoked a lot more questions and hopefully discussion. The last question that was handed in, I think, is hopefully a note to take away, and it was, how can the environmental community and local ag better connect? And I would just offer one potential solution is to engage in this a network like this network in places that maybe we're not so familiar going through the doors, but where the really important conversations, not just this one, but many that are facing us as a big systems change affect us in so many ways. So this network attempts to be that in our educational sessions, and we would really want your input into how we keep making this roadmap that is this network better and better through time. We've got the survey up here on the front table that you can take with you. Also a notice, a save the date for our network meeting coming up at the end of February. And then again, the extension survey in orange as a way that you can get your land-grant university being more responsive to things that you want us to work on statewide. So please feel free to linger and ask specific questions, but I do want to thank you all for your participation, taking time out of your busy day, and let's thank our panelists once again. We're done.